Liberty Ledger, where freedom meets the facts. Truth, uncompromised. America first.
Director Patel, you're a fascist running a Gestapo, and I have the evidence right here. The words sliced through the House Judiciary Committee room with surgical precision. Every syllable was perfectly timed to make the biggest impact on the millions watching at home. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stood behind her microphone like a prosecutor presenting her case to a jury of Instagram followers. Her red Valentino blazer, the one her stylists promised would dominate the visuals, glowed under the lights as she held up a stack of documents. These leaked FBI memos show your systematic targeting of progressive members of Congress. She kept going, her voice getting louder with every new claim. Surveillance, infiltration, persecution, all because we have the guts to challenge the status quo. This isn't law enforcement, Director. This is authoritarian suppression. And I've got the receipts. Behind her, her team was perfectly positioned for the best camera angles. The young, stylish, and diverse group nodded along in synchronized outrage. 3 of them were streaming live at once, their headlines screaming, "AOC destroys fascist FBI boss," and exposing the police state. Kash Patel sat perfectly still at the witness table, looking intentionally plain. He was just a middle-aged guy in a department store suit that had definitely seen better days. His hands were flat on the table, showing none of the defensive body language her team had expected. He watched her performance with the bored interest of someone watching a rehearsal for a play he already knew by heart. The American people have a right to know. AOC's voice reached a fever pitch, playing more to her 3.5 million online viewers than to the committee itself, accusing the director of using the FBI as a weapon against anyone speaking truth to power. She paused for dramatic effect, letting the soundbite hang there so it could be clipped and shared across the digital world her team had mastered. The viewer count on her live stream ticked up past 3.8 million. Director Patel, she leaned forward, locking him in what her media coach called her piercing gaze of truth. Do you deny these documents exist? Patel's response was quiet, forcing the stenographer to lean in to hear him. Congresswoman, would you mind if I took a look at those? It wasn't the response she had planned for. Her team had prepared for denials, excuses, or claims of executive privilege. But this simple request somehow shifted the energy in the entire room. The American people deserve to see these documents. Congresswoman, his interruption was soft but firm. If you're accusing me of signing something, I should at least be allowed to see it. A flash of annoyance crossed AOC's face before her media training took over again. These documents speak for themselves. Actually, they don't. Patel stood up slowly, pointing out that the FBI watermark on those papers was from a 2019 design. I didn't even become director until 2025. Those documents are fakes. You could feel the energy in the hearing room shift instantly. The comments on her live stream, which had been flying by moments ago, suddenly started to slow down. Question marks started appearing among all the fire emojis. Patel continued, his voice devastatingly calm. Forging federal documents is a felony, but let's put that aside for a moment. He reached for the briefcase next to his chair, its FBI seal catching the light. Let's talk about real documents. The locks popped open with mechanical precision. Inside, 5 folders were lined up perfectly, each with a handwritten label. Met Gala Deception, Robert's Scheme, Capital Mythology, Green New Deal Grift, and the Yorktown Files. He picked up the first folder as carefully as a surgeon choosing a scalpel. You mentioned receipts, Congresswoman, he said, looking up with an expression that held no malice or pride, just the calm patience of someone who had done their homework. What a coincidence. So did I. He opened the folder. Let's start with fashion, shall we? After all, you certainly made a statement with your wardrobe choices. Tax the rich, written right across the back of a designer dress. Bold, memorable, and borrowed, as you put it. AOC's hand, still clutching her fake documents, shook almost imperceptibly, but the cameras caught everything. They always did. Or was it? The folder didn't reveal the explosive classified files you'd expect from an FBI director, but something much more ordinary and way more damaging: receipts. There were dozens of them, organized with the meticulous care of a forensic accountant building a case, one designer handbag at a time. September 13th, 2021, Patel began, his voice as flat as if he were reading a grocery list instead of ending a political career. The Met Gala in America, a lexicon of fashion. You attended as a guest of the museum, wearing a designer dress with "Tax the Rich" emblazoned on the back. It was a bold declaration regarding the gap between the rich and the poor. The press absolutely devoured it. Your fans hailed the moment as legendary. He pulled out a photo. That now classic shot of AOC climbing the steps of the Met, her slogan clear for the whole world to witness. You informed the media that the gown was simply a loan from designer Aurora James. Channeling Cinderella, you claimed it had to be returned by the stroke of midnight. The hearing room went dead quiet, save for the rustle of paper as Patel pulled file after file from his briefcase. Here is the actual loan contract bearing your signature. He went on, setting the agreement down on the table. These are typical terms for a borrowed dress worth $35,000. It clearly states a return deadline of September 30th, 2021. And there is your signature right at the bottom. He stopped for a second, letting the gravity of the paperwork sink in before reaching for the next one. This next one is an email sent from Aurora James to your Chief of Staff on October 15th, 2021. The subject line reads, "Return of the Met Gala Dress." Shall I read it aloud for you? Without waiting for an answer, he read, "Hi, team. I'm just checking in on that dress. My studio really needs it returned for our permanent collection. Could someone please arrange for the return sometime this week?" It was a pretty straightforward request. A string of even more urgent emails followed after that. October passed, then November, then December. The designer's tone slowly evolved from polite nudges to obvious irritation. By the time January 2022 rolled around, Patel pointed out that Ms. James had called in the attorneys. This is a formal legal demand for the gown's return or a check for its full retail price. But this is where the story takes a turn. He held up another piece of paper. This one featured the letterhead of a prestigious law firm. This was your official response through your legal team. You argued the dress was actually a gift rather than a loan, claiming the designer had verbally agreed to donate it once she saw all the press coverage. Ms. James, however, says otherwise. She doesn't have a single record of any such deal. But let's go a bit further, Patel continued while grabbing some financial records, because the dress was only the tip of the iceberg. Here are the receipts from that very same evening. A pair of Hermes shoes worth $4,800. You said they were borrowed, yet they were never sent back. $12,000 in majory jewelry, also borrowed, and never returned. A $5,900 Judith Labor clutch, also on loan. And now, the pattern is impossible to ignore. The mounting total flashed up on the display screen in the hearing room. $57,700 for a single night's attire. All of it on loan. None of it ever given back. Then Patel spoke up, his voice sounding much sharper. This might look like a simple case of theft, designer welfare fraud, if you will. But it's the recurring habit that worries me, as this wasn't your first or last time playing this game. He lifted a bound report as thick as a telephone directory. My team has documented every single time you've borrowed high-end items for public appearances, galas, movie premieres, and even campaign rallies. The grand total of missing items comes to 247. The combined value is a staggering $3.2 million. A wave of gasps spread across the room. Over on AOC's live stream, the numbers were beginning to dip. But the people still watching were locked in, with comments scrolling by in a frantic blur of shock and letdown. But this is the point where simple theft turns into flat-out corruption. Patel kept going, pulling out a fresh stack of files. These records show wire transfers from your campaign and various packs straight to these very same designers. And it wasn't to pay for the clothes. Remember, those were supposedly just on loan. Wait, no. These payments are categorized as things like consulting fees, event planning, and voter outreach coordination. The meaning was obvious before he even had to say it. There's no way you could afford this wardrobe on a congressperson's paycheck. And using campaign money to buy them would be strictly against the law. That would be a crime. So, you cooked up a scheme, borrow the designer gear, keep it forever, and then find creative ways to funnel cash to the designers through back channels. He extracted one especially incriminating email thread. This is a conversation between your finance director and Aurora James's business manager. Your finance head writes, "We can't cut a check for the dress directly, but what if we just bring Aurora on as a campaign consultant? She doesn't actually have to do any consulting work. We'll just label it as brand strategy." The reply was, "That'll work. Just ensure the fee covers the full price of the dress, plus an extra 20% for the trouble." Patel glanced up from the paperwork. "That isn't borrowing, Congresswoman. That is money laundering. It's using campaign donations for personal gain, masked behind fraudulent consulting deals." "But hold on," he said, reaching back into his folder. "There is even more, because it turns out some of these designers weren't satisfied with just getting paid. They saw a bigger opportunity. Even more documents came to light. Once you set this precedent, designers started coming to you with their own offers. They wanted you to wear their outfits to major events in exchange for campaign cash. Not through direct checks, of course, because that would be too easy to spot. Instead, they pour money into your packs, sponsor your high-profile events, and hire your inner circle for absurdly high fees. The financial web he laid out was mind-boggling in its complexity. It was a cycle of fashion giants funneling cash through charities into political shells, which then paid consulting fees to AOC's allies, who eventually kicked back a piece of the action to her campaign. Patel made it clear that Met Gala dress wasn't a political statement at all. It was a cold, hard business transaction. You wore "Tax the Rich" on your back, while simultaneously ripping off designers and laundering campaign cash. The level of hypocrisy here is truly staggering. He reached into the Met Gala folder one last time to pull out a photo, but it wasn't a picture of AOC. It featured a young woman, maybe 19 or 20 years old, hunched over a sewing machine. This is Maria Santos," Patel said, his tone turning surprisingly soft. "She put in 16-hour days at Aurora James's studio just to hand-stitch the lettering onto your gown. She was paid bare minimum wage with zero overtime, all because she was labeled an artistic intern. She truly believed her work was helping to send a powerful message about economic injustice." He locked eyes with AOC. She actually wept when she realized you'd essentially stolen the dress she poured her heart into. She couldn't dream of affording a ticket to the Met Gala. She couldn't buy designer labels, but she could afford to put her faith in you. And how exactly did that work out for her? Patel shut the folder with a sense of deliberate finality. To some, fashion is just fluff, but theft is still theft. Fraud is fraud, and the same goes for hypocrisy. Well, that speaks loud and clear on its own. He reached for the next folder. The Roberts scheme. Let's take a look at your partner. The man you've been using as a financial middleman for years. This second folder felt different than the first. It was thicker and packed tight with financial records. It was the kind of paper trail that showed money moving in endless loops, yet always landing in the exact same pockets. Patel cracked it open with the clinical precision of a man who had spent months chasing down every cent. Riley Roberts. He held up a photo of a clean-cut man whose professionally casual look had tech startup written all over it. Your college sweetheart turned husband, a marketing consultant, a web developer, and a man of many gifts, including the apparent talent for cashing checks without doing any real work. He pulled a Federal Election Commission filing from the stack. Based on your own campaign records, Mr. Roberts has raked in $890,000 since 2018 for digital marketing consulting. That is an incredible paycheck for a consultant. So, let's see exactly what all that money actually bought. Patel started laying out documents like he was dealing cards in a game where he already held all the aces. Here are your campaign's invoice records. Every single check cut to Roberts Marketing LLC comes with a corresponding invoice, and they are incredibly repetitive. Digital strategy, social media optimization, brand development. It's the same vague buzzwords month after month. Then he produced a fresh set of documents. These are sworn depositions from your own campaign staff, taken during an FEC probe you likely assumed was dead in the water. When asked about Mr. Roberts's specific contributions, your own digital director gave a very telling response. He said, "I've never actually seen a single piece of work from Riley. AOC handles all of that directly." More sworn statements followed. There was the social media manager who never once received a strategy plan from Roberts. Then the communications director, who didn't even realize Roberts was on the payroll until she stumbled across the FEC filings. And finally, the finance director, who was ordered to process Roberts's invoices without asking any questions. "But surely," Patel said with a look of mock confusion, "a consultant getting paid nearly 900 grand must have produced something. Some blueprints, some marketing plans, maybe even just a PowerPoint deck." He made a big show of digging through the folder before finally pulling out a lone sheet of paper. This is the whole thing, the grand total of Riley Roberts's entire career as a consultant. A single email suggesting that you should probably post on Instagram more often. The date, January 2018. 8 words of consulting for $890,000. That works out to over $100,000 per word. Quite an impressive rate. A wave of nervous laughter rippled through the hearing room. Even some of the Democrats on the panel were starting to squirm in their chairs. But now, let's track where that money actually ended up. Patel kept pulling out bank records. These are the records for Mr. Roberts's business accounts. Your campaign payments land in there like clockwork. And then, just days later, that cash is funneled into personal accounts to pay for things that have absolutely nothing to do with political consulting. The list that followed was damning in its sheer ordinariness. Rent for a high-end luxury apartment, lease payments on a brand-new Tesla, dinner tabs at restaurants where a single meal costs more than a week's pay for most Americans, and lavish vacations to destinations that definitely weren't campaign stops in Iowa or New Hampshire. To summarize, Patel concluded, Essentially, your campaign was footing the bill for your boyfriend's life. That isn't consulting, it's embezzlement. But the situation gets even uglier. He produced a fresh set of papers, these ones stamped with official corporate seals. It appears Mr. Roberts wasn't satisfied with just cashing campaign checks, as he decided to scale his operations. These are the incorporation papers for 7 different LLCs, all owned by Mr. Roberts and established between 2019 and 2023. The names of the companies flashed across the screen: Progressive Digital Solutions, Green New Media, Social Justice Strategies, Future Forward Consulting, each name as hollow and vague as the invoices they would eventually send out. Can you guess who the main client for all these firms was? Patel asked with sharp irony. It was political committees, PACs, and various progressive groups, and by a shocking coincidence, every single one of them had a direct link to you. The web he laid out was complex, but the underlying motive was impossible to miss. Any organization looking to get close to AOC would simply hire one of Roberts's companies for consulting. The work was as vague as his campaign efforts, but the payments they received were undeniably real. Patel read from the records, noting that Justice Democrats funneled $240,000 into Progressive Digital Solutions for movement-building strategies. The Sunrise Movement handed over $180,000 to Green New Media for climate communication planning. Brand New Congress paid Future Forward Consulting $320,000 for organizational development. In total, organizations seeking influence with you moved $3.7 million into entities controlled by Roberts. And what exactly did that money buy them? It bought meetings, helpful tweets, and legislative backing. And then he showed an email that left the committee members in stunned silence. This message was sent from the executive director of a major environmental group straight to Riley Roberts. It read, "Riley, we need AOC to co-sponsor the carbon tax bill. What's your consulting price for making that happen?" Roberts replied, "The standard rate is $50K for legislative support, or $75K if you need her to take the lead." "Your partner," Patel said, looking directly at AOC, "was selling your vote, essentially putting a price on your office and auctioning it off to the highest bidder. But here is where this transforms from simple corruption into a criminal conspiracy," he added, pulling out a stack of phone logs. "These are text messages between you and Mr. Roberts, all obtained through a legal warrant. It turns out you weren't just a bystander to this operation. You were the one running it." He began reading the exchanges aloud. AOC to Roberts, "Greenpeace wants a meeting. Tell them it's $25K to the firm first." Roberts replied, "Isn't that a bit too obvious?" AOC's response, "Just make sure the invoice says strategy and not access." Then another exchange appeared. Roberts, "The nurses' union only offered $30K. AOC, tell them it's $50K or I'm completely booked solid." Roberts joked, "You're getting really good at this." AOC, "I just learned it from watching the establishment." "We're just better at covering our tracks." Patel laid the phone records aside. "You didn't come here to disrupt the system, Congresswoman. You perfected it. You took every dirty trick in politics, the pay-to-play, the kickbacks, and rebranded them for a millennial audience. You used your boyfriend as the middleman, Instagram activism as your smokescreen, and progressive slogans as your armor." He then pulled one final document from the Roberts folder. This is a formal whistleblower complaint filed by a former staffer at one of Roberts's front companies. She took the job thinking she'd be doing real work for progressive causes. When she realized no actual work was being done, that it was all just a front for selling access to you, she walked away and blew the whistle. Her testimony is absolutely devastating. She stated, I was ordered to create fake reports to cover up the payments. When I refused, Riley Roberts told me, "Nobody is actually reading these things. They're just paying for AOC's backing. The reports are just for the lawyers in case anyone starts asking questions." I realized I was part of a bribery ring and left on the spot. Patel snapped the folder shut. $900,000 in campaign funds were siphoned off. Another $3.7 million in kickbacks flowed through your husband's shell corporations. You turned your private relationship into a criminal racket, and your marriage into a money laundering machine. He then reached for the third file, labeled Capital Mythology. Now, let's talk about how you transformed a national tragedy into a personal cash cow. The third folder seemed to carry a weight far beyond its physical size, as if the gravity of January 6th itself was trapped between the pages. Patel opened it with a visible sense of distaste, not because he was afraid of the truth, but because the level of exploitation he was about to reveal was so repulsive. January 6th, 2021. He began speaking in a much lower, more solemn tone. It was a day that will live in infamy. The Capitol was breached. Our democracy was under fire. People lost their lives. He paused, letting those words sink in like lead in a quiet pond. And you, Congresswoman, saw nothing but a branding opportunity. The first thing he pulled out was a total surprise. It wasn't a stack of emails or memos, but an iPad ready to play security video. Multiple angles, all with timestamps, recorded right inside the Cannon House office building where your office is located. "Let's look at the facts," Patel said, hitting play on the video. At 2:01 p.m., the crowd broke through the Capitol's outer perimeter. By 2:15 p.m., the Capitol building itself was breached. The Cannon building, where you work, went into lockdown at exactly 2:20 p.m. He gestured toward the screen. "There you are, just strolling through the Cannon hallways without a care in the world. No running and zero signs of panic. You're just busy on your phone." The video showed AOC moving through the halls at the casual pace of someone heading to a coffee date, not someone running for their life. She was talking with her hands and even laughing every now and then. "Your office is in Cannon 229, Patel pointed out, but the rioters never even set foot in the Cannon building. The closest they ever got was the Capitol Rotunda, which is in a completely different building and separated by tunnels that were sealed off immediately. That day, you were about as safe as anyone could possibly be in that entire complex." He then pulled up phone records, showing that you recognized a golden opportunity when you saw one. "This is your personal call log from that very afternoon. 12 calls were made to different media outlets. 8 more went to your communications team, and 5 were to your literary agent, your book agent, Congresswoman. While the Capitol was literally under siege, you were busy negotiating book deals." The first transcript he read was chilling in just how calculated it sounded. AOC to her agent at 2:47 p.m. "This is huge, even bigger than we ever imagined. I need you to start pitching a survivor memoir right this second. We have to strike while the iron is still hot." The agent asks, "Are you safe?" "This seems," AOC replies, "I'm totally fine. I'm in a different building altogether, but that's not what the story is. The story is that I survived an assassination attempt. We need to get moving on this today." Patel looked up from the page. "Attempted assassination? You knew perfectly well you weren't in danger, but you were already spinning a narrative. And that narrative was about to become incredibly lucrative." He laid out a set of photos, but these definitely weren't from a security camera. These were high-end professional shots with dramatic lighting, showing AOC posing in fear and defiance. In some shots, she was cowering behind a door. In others, she was standing strong in empty hallways. These were actually taken on January 7th, Patel noted. Just one day after the attack, you brought in a pro photographer to stage terrifying scenes that never actually happened. This invoice proves you paid him $15,000 for documentary services. But he wasn't recording history. He was creating the version of history you wished people saw. The metadata on those files told the real story. Every single shot was clearly staged. In one photo, the reflection in a window reveals 3 assistants adjusting the studio lights. In another, a makeup artist is caught touching up AOC's face between takes. But that photo shoot was only the beginning of the plan. Patel then laid out a timeline of every media appearance AOC made after January 6th. Within a week, you were on every major news channel sharing your harrowing survival story. Let's take a look at the highlights. The clip that followed showed a masterclass in how to exaggerate a story. In those first interviews, AOC just mentioned being a bit worried about her safety. By the third time she told it, she was describing hiding in a bathroom, supposedly convinced she was going to die. By the 10th interview, she was claiming she heard rioters hunting for her and specifically shouting her name. But none of that ever happened, Patel said bluntly. Security audio from the Cannon building didn't pick up any of that. No rioters, and definitely no one calling your name. The only thing on the tape were security officers calmly and professionally doing their jobs. He then pulled out the financial files, revealing that your growing story had a very specific goal. It was all about the speaking fees. In just 1 month, your fee per appearance skyrocketed from $20,000 to $100,000. Your main topic was surviving democratic trauma, my January 6th story. The list of bookings was a mile long. You had universities paying 6 figures just to hear about your survival. There were corporate diversity events, international conferences on the resilience of democracy. Each one was paying for a story that was, at best, a wild exaggeration, and, at worst, a total lie. Let's look at the total earnings from those appearances. Patel added it all up. $4.2 million, a $1.5 million book advance for The Day They Came for Me, and a Netflix documentary deal worth another $2 million. You turned a tragedy where you were never at risk into a $7.7 million payday. He then produced therapy records that, while redacted, were clearly official. You also claimed to be suffering from PTSD, using it as an excuse to skip votes and committee meetings. But look at these billing records from your therapist. You only went to 2 sessions in total. According to the notes, you spent the entire first session asking how to milk a therapeutic narrative for the media. For the second session, you simply requested proof of a PTSD diagnosis without any follow-up treatment. But Patel said, as he pulled out one last paper, the most damning evidence of all is this text from January 5th, the day before the attack. It was sent from you to your chief of staff. The Trump rally tomorrow is going to be wild. If anything happens, we have to be ready to control the narrative. This could be our Reichstag fire moment. The chief of staff replied, "That seems dark." You responded, "Dark times call for dark strategies." Have the media team standing by. If something goes down, I want to be the face of the resistance by tonight. Patel set the messages down. You were already planning to exploit a tragedy before it even started. When it finally happened, you carried out your plan perfectly. You turned death into a paycheck, marketed the chaos, and made a profit off pain you never actually felt. 5 people lost their lives on January 6th, he continued, his voice turning cold. Brian Sicknick, Ashley Babbitt, Roseanne Boyland, Kevin Greason, and Benjamin Phillips. While their families were in mourning, you were calculating your speaking fees. While officers were dealing with real trauma, you were busy booking photo shoots. While democracy was under fire, you were negotiating book deals. He shut the folder with total finality. You turned a national catastrophe into a personal brand. That isn't about survival. That is sacrilege. His hand then moved toward the fourth folder, the Green New Deal grift. Now, let's look at how you turned climate activism into a game of insider trading. The fourth folder was packed with proof of how environmental hopes were twisted into financial scams. Patel opened it with the calm precision of someone ready to show how idealism was used for profit. On February 7, 2019, he began, holding up a clean copy of House Resolution 109. You introduced the Green New Deal as a bold new vision for America's climate future. These 14 pages were meant to reshape the economy, rethink energy, and change how we move. The markets took notice instantly. Traditional energy stocks tanked. Renewable energy companies went through the roof. It was total chaos and a massive opportunity. He stopped for a moment, looking AOC straight in the eye. Most people saw a new policy proposal. You saw an insider stock tip. The first documents he showed were trading records full of transactions that followed a very clear pattern. These are SEC records from a trading account belonging to your college roommate, Sarah Martinez. The timing of these trades is very interesting. It was February 4th. Just 3 days before you announced the Green New Deal, she bought $400,000 worth of call options for renewable energy. And these were very specific companies, too. They weren't the big names everyone knows, but smaller firms that just happened to be mentioned in your resolution. The list was quite extensive. SunPower, Bloom Energy, Plug Power, and Ballard Power Systems, all companies that would see their stock double or triple after the Green New Deal was announced. Patel noted dryly that your roommate, a kindergarten teacher making $55,000 a year, suddenly had $400,000 to gamble on complex derivatives. When the SEC asked, she claimed it was an inheritance, but he had another document ready to go. Her last living grandparent passed away back in 2012. There was no inheritance. The money trail actually leads to a series of structured deposits meant to fly under the radar. It's a classic move for laundering money. But let's see how she actually did with her investments. Patel then pulled up a profit chart. You announced the Green New Deal on February 7th. By February 8th, her positions had jumped by 340%. She sold off everything immediately. Her total profit was $36 million. That is incredible timing for a teacher who claimed she'd never even traded options before. He then produced text messages taken from Martinez's phone. Except, it turns out she wasn't acting alone. These messages between you and her tell a very different story. On February the 3rd, you texted her to buy calls for Plug and another company. You told her to go big and trust you. She wrote back, asking if this was even legal. You told her it wasn't insider trading because it wasn't corporate info. You claimed political intelligence is a different ballgame. You said everyone does it. Everyone does it. Patel repeated your excuse for securities fraud. But you weren't satisfied with just one person trading for you. More documents showed a whole network of accounts, cousins, friends, and former campaign staff, who all suddenly got interested in renewable energy in early February 2019. All of them made incredibly lucky trades. All of them walked away with massive profits right after the news broke. Total profits for your entire network hit $8.7 million. This money didn't come from building value or companies, but from having early access to market-moving political news. That is insider trading, Congresswoman, no matter what you want to call it. And the Green New Deal was only your first test. Patel pulled out another stack of files. Once the profit potential of policy drops clicked, you turned it into a full-blown industry. He laid out a timeline pairing AOC's big policy teases with the trade moves within her circle. Whenever she hinted at a crackdown on drug prices, her proxies immediately shorted Big Pharma. Every time she suggested cutting the defense budget, they loaded up on puts for military contractors. As soon as she brought up crypto rules, they moved into position. The pattern is impossible to ignore. Patel noted, "You treated the halls of Congress like your own private trading floor. But this is where we cross the line from shady to straight-up criminal." He pulled up emails between AOC and several green energy bosses. You weren't just playing off your own press releases. You were actually scheming with these firms for a massive shared payout. This specific thread with the head of a huge solar company is a total smoking gun. He read the CEO's message to her aloud. "We really need this infrastructure bill to carve out a spot for our specific new panels. What's it going to take to get that done?" AOC replied that some generous support for her movement and investment tips for her associates would be required. "I'm sure we can handle both," the CEO answered. He noted their stock would probably triple if the bill cleared. AOC replied, "Good to know. Very good to know indeed." Just 2 days later, Patel pointed out, her network dropped $2.3 million on call options for that very company. The specific clause made it into the final bill. The stock value tripled overnight. Your inner circle walked away with $6.9 million in profit. The CEO's company landed billions in taxpayer-funded contracts. It was a win for everyone except the American taxpayers and anyone playing by the actual market rules. But the corruption went even deeper than that. Patel showed how AOC would trash specific green stocks to crash their price, letting her team buy the dip right before she clarified her stance and sent them through the roof. He detailed how she'd leak legislative drafts to her preferred traders hours before the public ever saw them. He explained how green groups looking for her backing were funneled to consultants who traded investment tips for political support. But Patel claimed the most disgusting part, while pulling out more files, was how she actually killed real environmental progress just to make a buck. He produced messages proving she'd gutted nuclear power provisions, not because of safety, but because she was heavily betting against nuclear stocks. He showed how she tucked poison pills into bills destined to fail after making sure her network was poised to profit from that failure. He described how she used fiery rhetoric to stir up market volatility, basically turning the Green New Deal from a climate plan into a market-rigging scheme. "This is a clip from a Miami fundraiser back in February 2023, Patel said, hitting play on his tablet. AOC's voice came through loud and clear, addressing a room she obviously thought was on her side. "The great thing about the Green New Deal is how flexible it is. We can shift the markets with one tweet or flip an entire industry with a single press release. My friends have pulled in millions just by watching what I'm about to announce. And the kicker is, it's all perfectly legal. We aren't using corporate secrets. We're trading on the very future we're building." Patel cut the audio. "Trading on the very future you're building. That isn't public service, Congresswoman. That's a racketeering operation. You transformed climate activism into a criminal racket, swapped environmental policy for insider trading, and used the dreams of young activists to line your own pockets." He drew one last document from the pile. "This is a letter from Greta Rivera, a 22-year-old activist who sank her entire life savings into green energy because she believed in your Green New Deal speeches. She lost every penny when you suddenly flipped your stance on key clauses, crashing the whole sector. She wrote to you, asking why you'd betray the cause. Your office basically told her that market risks are just part of investing. They claimed no one should be trading based on political talk. Except that's exactly what you were doing, what you were setting up, and exactly how you were getting rich. Patel snapped the folder shut. The estimated take from Green New Deal insider trading is $47 million, not earned from saving the earth, but from rigging the game. You didn't change environmental policy, you just figured out how to sell it. He reached for the very last folder. The Yorktown Files. It's time to talk about who Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez actually is. And I'll give you a hint. She's not just a bartender from the Bronx. This last folder was slimmer than the rest, but it held the heavy truth of a completely faked identity. Patel opened it like an archaeologist digging up a massive, foundational lie. Every single document was like a fossil, proving how the lie evolved. After all, every hero needs a good origin story, he began, his voice carrying the rhythmic flow of a master storyteller. Batman had Crime Alley to define him. Spider-Man had that fateful radioactive spider bite. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, well, let's take a look at what her story actually was. He held up a campaign flyer from 2018, the year of AOC's big breakthrough. It was an iconic image. A young Latina woman in a working-class New York neighborhood, encircled by a diverse group of supporters. You could even see the elevated subway tracks running in the background. The text on it read, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, bartender, Bronx native, and champion of the people. It's a powerful narrative, Patel admitted. A working-class woman of color claws her way from mixing drinks all the way to the halls of Congress. It's almost too perfect, like a modern myth, which really should have been our first red flag. Then, he pulled out an official property record. This is the actual deed for 234 Crestwood Avenue in Yorktown Heights, New York. It was bought in 1991 by Sergio and Blanca Ocasio-Cortez for $355,000. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, Yorktown Heights is definitely not the Bronx. It's located in wealthy Westchester County. The median household income there is a cool $137,000. It's a place where executives and high-level professionals raise their kids, not where bartenders scramble to pay the rent. The next piece of evidence was a school enrollment record. She graduated from Yorktown High School in 2007. Not Bronx Science or any other city school. Not a single school located in the Bronx. She went to Yorktown High, where the student parking lot looks more like a luxury car dealership. In that world, the biggest stress is whether Princeton or Yale has the superior pre-med track. But surely, Patel continued, playing up his curiosity for the audience, the family must have moved to Yorktown later on, after they'd already made a life in the Bronx. Instead, he laid out birth records and early school enrollments. Actually, no. You attended Yorktown schools starting all the way back in kindergarten. Your whole childhood was spent in one of the most affluent suburbs in New York. The closest you ever got to the Bronx was probably seeing it through a car window on your way into Manhattan. But wait, he said, reaching for the tax records, it gets even more interesting. Your father, who you painted as a struggling small business owner, was actually a thriving architect and real estate developer. Here are the incorporation papers for Ocasio-Roman Architects and Totes and Builders, Inc. They specialized in luxury home renovations. Their client list looks like a directory of Westchester's elite. The financial documents that followed told a story that was light years away from the working-class struggle. The Ocasio-Cortez family owned several properties, played the stock market, and could easily afford private tutors and elite test prep. Boston University, Patel noted, showing the tuition bills. That costs about $70,000 a year. You managed to graduate with almost no student debt. How does a struggling family from the Bronx pull that off? They don't, but a wealthy family from Westchester certainly can. But that bartending job was the real deal, right? Patel asked with a smirk. That's the very foundation of your whole story. Alexandria, the humble bartender just trying to survive. He then pulled up the employment files from Flat's Fix Taqueria. You worked a grand total of 6 shifts over a 4-month span. You were pulling in an average of $500 in tips a night. That's not the life of a struggling worker. That's a rich kid pretending to be working class for a few hours every week. But this is where things get really bold, Patel said, presenting a lease agreement. This lease is for Apartment 7B at 1711 Palmetto Street in Bushwick. You told everyone this was the place where you were scraping by while bartending. There's just one problem. You never actually lived there. The lease was in a different name, Sarah Chen, a real full-time bartender at Flat's Fix. Ms. Chen has actually signed an affidavit, Patel explained. You paid her $3 grand just to use her place for photo ops and to use her address as your own. She was under the impression it was all for some art project. She was stunned later on to see her home and her life story being passed off as yours. Private texts between AOC and her campaign manager shed light on the whole setup. We need more photos that look like a struggle. Can Sarah clear out of her place for a couple of hours? Make sure there's some ramen in the pantry and throw some bills on the table. It has to look real. But maybe the most cold-hearted lie of all, Patel said, his tone turning sharp, is the one about your grandmother. He showed photos that AOC had shared online of a rundown apartment with ceiling leaks, claiming it was her grandma's place in the Bronx where she spent part of her childhood. You used those pictures to solicit donations and prove you knew what it was like to struggle. Here's the catch. He pulled out more property records. Your grandmother never even lived in the Bronx. She lived in Puerto Rico the whole time. Those photos actually came from some random apartment your staff found on Craigslist. The tenant, a woman named Maria Gonzalez, was paid $500 just to let you take pictures of her leaky ceiling. She had no clue you were going to tell the world it was your grandmother's house. And for the final blow, Patel revealed the financial statements. Your actual grandmother left you $87,000 when she passed away back in 2016. It might not be a fortune, but it's a far cry from the life of poverty you've been selling. Every single part of your life story is a total fabrication, Patel summarized, laying out one document after another. The Bronx childhood was a lie. The working-class struggle was a fake, and that bartending job was just a photo op. You aren't really Alexandria from the Bronx. You're just Sandy from Westchester, playing a character designed by political consultants. He then revealed a final piece of evidence, a video from a 2010 event at the Yorktown Heights Country Club. In it, a young AOC, going by Sandy at the time, was giving a speech at what looked like a debutante ball. Her accent was pure Westchester elite. Everything about her, from her designer dress to her vocabulary, screamed privilege. "My fellow Yorktown Heights neighbors," young Sandy said in the clip, "we have a duty to use our status to help the less fortunate, but we must never forget our roots and the privileges we enjoy." Patel paused the video. "The truth is, Congresswoman, you didn't forget where you came from. You hid it. You took your upper-class Westchester background, disguised it with a Bronx narrative, and sold it to voters who just wanted someone authentic. Here is the ultimate insult. He pulled out her voter registration records. You used your father's Bronx business address to register to vote while you were actually living in Yorktown. You've been lying about being a Bronx resident since you were 18 years old. And it wasn't even for a political edge. Back then, you couldn't have known you'd eventually run for office. No, you did it for something much smaller and more revealing, to get local New York City discounts at museums and theaters. He slowly shut the folder. Your entire political career has been built on a massive lie. Every speech about your hardships, every story about your modest roots, and every claim to being working class was nothing but fiction. You aren't a voice for the underdog. You're a wealthy woman in a costume, stealing struggles you never faced, and claiming a heritage you never actually lived. The bartender from the Bronx never even existed. Patel finished his statement. She was just a character designed by a committee and played by an actress from Westchester. Now, the real question is, what does Congress do with a representative who doesn't actually represent anything real? He gathered the 5 folders: fraud, corruption, theft, insider trading, and a total deception of identity, and stacked them neatly. The evidence is massive, fully documented, and impossible to deny. Patel turned to Chairman Jordan, his voice ringing with institutional authority. Mr. Chairman, I have federal agents waiting just outside. The warrants have already been signed. I recommend we pause this hearing immediately so the Congresswoman can be arrested and processed. As the FBI walked into the room, AOC's carefully built world crumbled right before everyone's eyes. Her staff had already fled their posts. Her live stream had been replaced by an error message. When she finally managed to speak, her voice didn't have that rehearsed Bronx rhythm. It had the unmistakable tone of Westchester wealth. This isn't happening. You can't do this. Do you have any idea who I am? Yes, Patel answered simply. Now we finally do. The arrest of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on the floor of the House Judiciary Committee became the most watched political event in the history of the country. It wasn't just about the drama, though seeing her led away in handcuffs while yelling about fascism was a sight to behold. It was about the total collapse of a fake political persona in real time. Within a few hours, Sandy from Westchester was trending higher than AOC on every social platform. The memes were brutal, comparing her tax-the-rich dress to her mansion in Yorktown Heights. The stories about her bartending were mocked alongside her 6 documented shifts, as the working-class hero was revealed to be a debutante. But under all the jokes, there was real pain, especially in the neighborhoods she claimed to speak for. In the Bronx, the reaction was absolutely explosive. Local leaders who had supported her felt completely betrayed. Young activists who looked up to her realized their hero was nothing but a hologram. Maria Santos, the seamstress who worked on that Met Gala gown, became an accidental voice for everyone who felt cheated. She didn't just steal clothes, she said. She stole our stories, our struggles, and our truth. The political shockwaves were felt across the entire country, not just New York. Democrats dropped her incredibly fast, even the ones who had built their own careers by associating with her. The squad fell apart overnight as the other members scrambled to distance themselves and prove they were actually authentic. The stock market, reacting to the news of insider trading, saw its most chaotic day in years. The AOC portfolio, stocks that had suspiciously surged right before her policy shifts, crashed hard as investors realized the party was over. The SEC just launched an emergency probe into dozens of shady trading patterns linked to political leaks. Riley Roberts was caught at JFK trying to catch a flight to Switzerland, apparently thinking he could access his crypto millions from overseas. Travelers live-streamed his arrest as he sobbed, insisting he was just following Sandy's orders. Sorry, I meant Alexandria's. But the deeper they dug, the more they found a rot that went way beyond just one congresswoman. The Justice Democrats were exposed as nothing more than a theater troupe posing as a political movement, with their leadership hauled off on conspiracy charges. Raided documents brought Project Authenticity to light, a systematic effort to build and elect fake candidates across the country. 7 other sitting members of Congress were caught up in it as their carefully scripted origin stories fell apart under the spotlight. The Bronx bartender blueprint had been used over and over again. There was the Detroit teacher, who was actually a Grosse Pointe Trust Fund kid, the Atlanta nurse, who was a failed actress, and the Phoenix veteran, who only served 6 weeks before a convenient medical discharge. Global reactions went from gloating to genuine fear for the future of American democracy. Chinese state media mocked the theatrical nature of Western politics, while our European allies started panicking about the integrity of their own systems. Everyone was asking the same thing. If they could manufacture AOC, who else was just acting? Then the trials became the most watched show on TV. AOC was denied bail after forensic experts discovered she had access to $47 million in hidden assets. She walked into court in an orange jumpsuit, a far cry from her usual designer socialist look. Her legal team tried to argue she had diminished capacity and was manipulated by others, but the evidence was just too strong. The prosecution's case was devastatingly simple. They didn't need to prove any wild conspiracies or complex master plans. They just played back her own words, showed her own texts, and laid out her financial records. The woman who built her world on social media was ultimately taken down by her own digital trail. The most damaging moment came when prosecutors played audio from a speech she gave at the Yorktown Heights Country Club. It was her real voice, casually talking about privilege and responsibility. The whole courtroom watched her cringe as her true self, Sandy from Westchester, destroyed the character she'd played for years. The verdict didn't surprise a soul. Guilty on every single count. Fraud, theft, insider trading, conspiracy, money laundering, and lying to officials. The 25-year sentence with no parole means she won't be getting out until she's middle-aged. With her political career over, she's now just a cautionary tale in the history books. But the most permanent damage was done to the progressive movement itself. Young activists felt completely betrayed. Their entire cause was poisoned by its association with a fraud. The policies AOC championed, like universal health care and climate action, took a massive hit. Even economic justice suffered because it was tied to her corruption. How can voters ever trust a politician's backstory again? How can anyone believe in authentic representation when authenticity itself can be faked? The reforms that followed were massive, but maybe not enough. The Authentic Act now requires every federal candidate to go through an intense background check. Financial disclosure laws were tightened to include family members and close associates. But how do you pass a law against a good performance? How do you legally require someone to have a genuine biography? In her cell at the Otisville Federal Prison, ironically located in Westchester County, not far from her real childhood home, Ocasio-Cortez has plenty of time to think about her choices. Reports describe her as a model inmate who teaches yoga and works in the library. She's reportedly dropped the Bronx accent entirely, speaking only in the sharp, polished tones of suburban wealth. The woman who branded herself as the future of American politics has become its darkest warning. The bartender from the Bronx was revealed to be nothing but a character in a play that has finally, thankfully, ended. But the final image of this whole saga isn't about AOC at all. It's about the real bartenders, the actual struggling workers, and the genuine activists who are still out there fighting without the cameras or the costumes. They're the ones who have to rebuild trust in progressive politics and prove that not every claim of injustice is just performance art. As one Bronx organizer put it, she didn't just lie about who she was. She made it harder for those of us who actually are who we claim to be. That's the real crime, making truth itself look suspicious. The actress has taken her final bow. The reviews are in. A compelling performance, a criminal execution, and zero chance of an encore. I will search for the phrase, "In American politics, the show for once was," in the current directory to see if there is a larger context or a specific file you want me to rewrite. I will read the latest log file, logs log 2026-0205, text, to see if it contains the script that needs to be rewritten. I will search for In American Politics in the current directory, excluding the desktop app.winforms.exe, WebView2 folder, to find any relevant script files. I will list the contents of the Assets directory to see if there are any additional script files that were not mentioned. I will list all files in the root directory to ensure I haven't missed any potential script files. I will read appsettings.json to see if it contains any script or text related to American politics. I will search for In American Politics within the Logs directory to see if the full text sent to the CLI was logged. I will read all the log files in the Logs directory to see if I can find the full text of the script. I will search for the word Politics in all text files within the current directory and its subdirectories to find the complete script. I will search for the word Politics in the Assets and Logs directories, excluding the WebView folder, to find the full script. I will use the glob tool to search for any chunk or text files in the current directory that might contain the script content. I will search for any file named transcript text in the current directory and its subdirectories. I will search for the word American in all log files to see if I can find the full context of the script. I will search for any chunk.txt files in the project's temporary directory to see if they contain the script content. I will search for the script content within the chats directory of the project's temporary directory. I will read the most recent session file, session 2026-02-05T11 30 6CF0BUIBU SON to see if it contains any information about the script. I will list the files in the chats directory again, sorting by modification time to find the most recent session. I will attempt to list the contents of the C++ my app config /wash output directory, as mentioned in appsettings.json, to see if it contains the script. I will search for any text files in the current directory to ensure I haven't missed any potential script files. In the world of American politics, for once, the spectacle felt truly genuine.